What took decades to build and is the envy of the world, a network of alliances that has kept the United States safe after World War II, is today, right now, shakier than at any other point, all because of the Trump administration. News breaking today of extraordinary discussions that weeks or months ago would have been unthinkable. NBC News has exclusive reporting that some of the United States' closest allies are talking about scaling back their intelligence sharing relationship with the United States. That includes the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. It's also known as the Five Eyes Alliance. But it also includes Israel and Saudi Arabia, who are having these conversations. And it's because, quote, concerns about safeguarding foreign assets whose identities could inadvertently be revealed. One Western government official tells NBC News this, quote, there are serious discussions going on about what information can be shared with the U.S. The Five Eyes have always worked on the premise that we don't spy on each other. I don't think that's reliable anymore. Tulsi Gabbard and these other characters, I don't think we can have any degree of normalcy in the relationship. That's right now where we are, and I don't see any way that changes. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. Out in the open today, our European allies held another emergency meeting to try to figure out how to prepare for a future without the United States as a reliable ally. NBC News confirmed earlier reporting that there are ongoing talks happening between around 20 countries, mostly European countries, interested in contributing to what they call a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine. It is, of course, a response and a reaction to the events over the last week, the halting of arms shipments to Ukraine, the pause in intelligence sharing with our ally Ukraine, and the ambush of our ally, whose war against Vladimir Putin had once united the West. And in the days after that meeting, the attacks on Zelensky himself. Now, Politico is reporting this, quote, 4 senior members of Donald Trump's entourage have held secret discussions with some of Kyiv's top political opponents to Volodymyr Zelensky, just as Washington aligns with Moscow in seeking to lever the Ukrainian president out of his job. Those discussions center on whether Ukraine could hold quick presidential elections. These are being delayed in line with the country's constitution because Ukraine remains under martial law. Critics of holding elections say they could be chaotic and play into Russia's hands, with so many potential voters serving on the front lines or living abroad as refugees. And news breaking just a few minutes ago, President Zelensky posted on X that Ukrainian officials will meet with his American partners during a scheduled meeting in Saudi Arabia on Monday. President Zelensky says this, quote, Ukraine is most interested in peace. America's allies realigning for a world without American leadership as the Trump administration takes actions favorable to Russia is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Kube, who's bylined on that reporting we read from. Also joining us, former CIA director, now senior national security analyst John Brennan's here. Courtney, take me through what you're reporting.
Yeah, so we have a couple of stories that deal with all of this. One is on some discussions that the Trump administration is having about the future partnership with NATO. So we have seen many of these NATO's countries, they're European Union countries, they are meeting, talking about the future for Ukraine, talking about the future for defense of Europe. And for the first time, they are now talking about it in a way where the United States doesn't play as big of a role. Well, the Trump administration is also doing the same. They are now considering some major changes to their NATO relationship that would include potentially prioritizing the members or the nations who spend a certain amount of their GDP on defense. Now, right now, NATO members are expected to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. The Trump administration has now been calling for that to be increased to 5%. Nicole, of course, the U.S. doesn't spend 5%. They're right around 3.9. But the Trump administration is now calling on all members to increase their defense spending as part of their GDP. Now, according to the officials who we spoke with, the Trump administration is considering pulling troops back from some of the countries that do not spend as much, and even calibrating some of the exercises that the U.S. is involved in, so not participating in exercises with countries that don't spend as much on defense as some of the other allies. Of course, this would be a huge change to how the United States has dealt with the NATO alliance historically for decades, since the Washington Treaty was signed. And it opens up the possibility that the United States would not be there to defend in the case Article 5 is invoked. That is, of course, if one NATO member is attacked, all NATO members are attacked, and they have the option to respond for their defense. That's one of our stories. Another one is on intelligence, as you were just saying. Some of the United States' closest allies and intelligence sharing allies are now having discussions and concerns about how the United States is clearly moving closer to Russia. The Trump administration, with their language, with some of the actions, seem to be trying to have better relations with Moscow, normalization, essentially, of relations. That is causing concern among intelligence allies and intelligence officials who are now questioning whether sharing some of the most sensitive information with the United States could potentially compromise foreign assets. Of course, those are individuals responsible for gathering intelligence all around the world. It's one of the most sacrosanct parts of intelligence gathering, of the intelligence world, is keeping their identities and keeping those individuals safe. Some of these allies are now concerned that they cannot rely on the United States to do that, Nicole.
Courtney, can you just sort of, with all of your knowledge of that building behind you, just put into context how significant a shift this would be for not just the military, but the entire national security apparatus?
I mean, I don't know of a shift that would be more significant from a military perspective than this would be. If, in fact, the United States really pulls back from NATO, and really decreases support for NATO. Think about it. The United States has troops throughout I think all of these NATO countries, but if not all, most of these NATO countries, and in some cases, thousands of troops. They have combatant command headquarters there. They conduct exercises with these allies. Week after week, year after year, the United States does rotations of brigades into Europe as part of this big deterrence initiative. Not having the close relationship, the working relationship on a military-to-military relationship with NATO and with these partners would be one of the biggest departures for the United States military that we've seen in decades, Nicole.
Director Brennan, let's take the two pieces of reporting separately, and let's start with Courtney's second piece of reporting. This was a question I've been asking on and off of television for the better part of 9 months. What would the impact be to the intelligence sharing agreements if Trump were to seem to align with Putin? Well, he's as always, he's 10 steps ahead of where everyone thinks the Trump story is going to go, and he's publicly aligning with Putin. He's castigating America's ally in the Oval Office and publicly saying the things that Putin would say had he been sitting on that couch next to J.D. Vance. I wonder what you make of how much of the discussions about stopping the flow of intelligence among our allies is about what they're saying it's about, and how much of it is about all of this being shared with Russia.
This is also damaging and dangerous for U.S. national security interests, Nicole. It is unsurprising that our partners and allies around the world, especially in Europe, are now reevaluating what it is they want to do in terms of sharing information and intelligence with the U.S. The strength of the U.S. intelligence community over the course of many decades has been a result of all of those relationships that we've forged around the globe with intelligence and security services. As good and as big as U.S. intelligence is, we rely heavily on these other countries and these services in order to provide us the type of access and information that we need, because we really need to have them. They have some unique accesses and presence. As Courtney said, it's not just the concerns about the identities of their human sources. That's absolutely critical to them. But it's also some of their technical collection systems. And the fact that the Trump administration now is cozying up to Russia, they really have to ask themselves, how can they trust the United States to share with the United States intelligence agencies the most sensitive information that they have and intelligence that they gather? Because it could be compromised as a result of Trump's whims to direct the heads of the intelligence agencies to share information. Maybe he wants to give Putin, some type of insight into why we know certain things about what's going on inside of Ukraine or other places. So again, I can see that this is going to be a snowballing effect. as more and more services around the globe ask themselves, how can they rely on the U.S. in terms of sharing those secrets with us?
Can you also speak to the first piece of reporting about, I mean, and I always think it's important when you talk about NATO, because I didn't know this until I went to work in government, and I obviously worked in government on 9/11, but the only country that's actually, to put it in terms that Trump relates to, taken a withdrawal from the Article 5 commitment is the United States of America. Article 5 says if any of your allies are attacked, you will defend them. We're the only ones that have cashed that out. But what does it mean that he doesn't want to affirm that commitment?
It means a lot. The fact that the United States has been basically the leader of NATO over many decades, it allows us to help to orchestrate the various militaries in the NATO constellation, to make sure that there's going to be the coordination, the cooperation, to try to maximize and optimize the capabilities that we have. And so I'm so glad that NATO countries are now increasing their defense spending and investment. That's certainly necessary. But again, the United States really derives such benefit from having these countries and the militaries of these countries be coordinating with us, so that in the event that there's going to be some type of challenge, whether it be from Russia or somewhere else, we're able to respond very quickly. And that coordination that takes place across the NATO community is so critically important to ensuring that we're going to be, it's an effective alliance, which really has been the case for generations. And again, what Trump is doing right now is upending many, many years of developing the relationships, the trust, the capabilities that exist, that NATO has been the strongest and most powerful alliance in the world. And I think we're seeing what Putin has long hoped, that NATO would be diminished, that NATO's capabilities would be decreased. And I never thought it would be the United States that would be the one taking the lead in doing that.